Welcome to the Di-scussions podcast.
Di-scussions.
Isn't it so good?
Such a good pun.
I didn't come up with it myself. I wish I could take credit.
I love a good pun, so that's perfect.
How are you feeling today?
Good, yeah. Kind of like what we talked about before we got on air here. There's a sense of excitement in that the energy is picking up in the building, but, with that comes the kind of constant reminder when, you realize what we've kind of gone through as a community. It's brutal, right? It's kind of the excitement ebbs and flows because the reality of what we have gone through also is still on the top of mind. So yeah, it's a lighthearted good, I guess. Yeah,
I understand. And for those listeners who aren't necessarily into CrossFit, what happened is we're at the CrossFit Games, and on Thursday at the first event, there was a run and swim event, and unfortunately, very tragically, one of the athletes, Lazar Đukić, died. And so there were a lot of questions as to whether we should continue with the CrossFit Games or not, because it does last through Sunday. Lots of events and athletes coming from all over the world. CrossFit Games did decide that it should continue. They did cancel all events that day, but on Friday they resumed. So Cooper here is a agent and does a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Things. Why don't you tell us a bit about your current athlete roster?
Yeah, so I'm grateful and very honored to be able to work with a lot of the top athletes in the space. Male and female. On the female side of things, you'll probably see me tagging along with people like Danielle or Annika Greer, Alexis, Raptis, Bethany Flores, kind of that whole group. And then on the men's side, we've got Dallin Pepper and Justin Medeiros and Jason Hopper and Pat Bellner and a lot of those guys there. So we're super fortunate over at Lab with the crew we've got. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and you're very good at it. You're very personal. That's the first thing that kind of struck me when I first met you. And obviously Annika loves you. So I knew you'd be great. But it's really nice to meet someone so personable. And I think that very much has to do with your job as well, right? So why don't you tell us a bit about your job, what you do on any given day, or especially at an event like this?
Yeah, no, for sure. I usually make the joke that my job is glorified babysitting. It's not true, really. What it is it's a, you're a people person, right? And so, you try to lead with empathy and understanding, and then sometimes, a shoulder to cry on, or a tough love moment or something like that to try to get these athletes to compete as they do. Like getting down to brass tacks, I help manage athletes' endorsement deals so that they can make a financial living and train as much as possible to become the best athlete version of themselves. But beyond that, and the more human level, I feel like I'm, just kind of like maybe a brother, a close friend, a confidant. Like people have asked, hey, do you have a law degree for this? And I'm like, honestly, no. When things get too hairy, I come to people like you who have your law degree. But what I need is a psychology degree because, you're dealing with emotions and everything that comes with the stress and pressure of being a professional athlete. So, yeah, that is what I do.
And it's kind of like you're managing a team when you think about it. And whether it be sports or any kind of industry, HR stuff, human relations is very hard.
Yeah.
And because you have to deal with everyone so differently, and everyone has strengths, weaknesses, and you have, as a leader or as someone that they rely on, have to sort of mold yourself to those things.
Yep.
And then you add on a personality, you add on stresses, and then you have your own life with your own stresses. Yeah. So how is it that you manage that?
I think a lot of it is code switching. I like to be pretty lighthearted, and I appreciate you saying I'm personable. I try to be. I think it's just more fun and easier to connect with people in like a lighthearted and fun comedic type of way. And then I'm also down to get like serious and talk business or, emotionally supportive. But I think for the most part, I'm just trying to have fun and have these people, ease up and just, they're so stressed and so tired and all of that all the time that I think the first thing I do is try to just be lighthearted so that I'm easy to be around. And then, after that, it's like each athlete kind of dictates how I proceed, right? Because, some need more emotional support, some need more logistical support and are super dialed as human beings, right? Some just want to keep things surface level and others want to get, process whether it's breakups or, a tragedy that we've dealt with here or whatever. So it just kind of goes from athlete to athlete. And then in terms of balancing my own personal life, I mean, Becca will tell you that that's always kind of a work in progress. And, my mom will tell me I need to allocate time to put my phone down and kind of turn off. And I've tried being better about that. I've tried being more vocal about that, especially with the athletes that, Saturday and Sunday might not be the time, and maybe let me have those days. Because although there's no off days really, and I don't really need them to be because I love what I do so much, there are moments of time where it's like, maybe if a brand reaches out, I'm like, we're not going to have this conversation on a Saturday. I'll hit you up on Monday.
It's so hard because we're so connected to our phones with everything going on. I mean, with what I do as well. And I struggle with finding time to step away from the phone.
Yep.
And even physically not looking for it.
Yeah.
And not wanting it to be on me. It's really hard.
Or the like phantom buzz.
Yeah.
You feel a buzz and you're like, there's nothing there. Like, so weird. Seriously, it's like, it's all new, right? So like 50 years from now, the studies that are going to come out around these things and what it does to people's brain are probably going to be it's going to be like smoking and cigarettes, right? Completely. It's going to be not good. So we've tried taking, Becca and I have tried taking kind of precautionary measures. We actually just bought this thing called a brick, which is like this little plastic thing that's got an app attached to it. And you essentially click the app and it's kind of like the time limit, right? So you know how your phone has the time limit that you can set, but it's so easy to just click ignore, add a minute, 15 minutes, whatever, and you just do it repeatedly, and then you're just setting yourself up for success. But the brick, you have to literally take your phone, scan it, it puts it into brick mode, so it's got a bunch of blocked apps, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe you walk to the other, walk downstairs to your office, or you put the thing somewhere else, so it's not convenient to get up and go back and unbrick it, right? You have to touch it again to be able to unlock the app. And it's crazy to like think of that, but it's reality, right?
And it's what we need. That's the reality. What's sad is that the reality is we need something like that.
Yeah, it has to be really inconvenient. So I'm like, I just brick my phone, go down into my office downstairs, and then I'm like, oh, if I want to check Instagram, I have to go all the way upstairs. That's annoying. I'm going to do that. So I'll stay more focused.
Yes.
I just, I don't know, little things. We're experimenting with it.
But I guess, with an event like this one, obviously, whether Thursday had happened or not, you'd be so connected to your phone, right? Because there's so many athletes within your roster probably reaching out to you.
Yep.
But then when you add the tragedy from Thursday, how did you kind of manage that? Because you have your own emotions too with regards to everything. So how is it that you navigated that whole situation on Thursday with your athletes?
I think the best way to navigate that is to be like Switzerland, right? You have to be neutral, because I can feel one way, but an athlete can feel a totally separate way, and that's completely fair and fine. And so I don't really want to push them one way or the other. I just want to arm them with feeling heard, and then, what are the outcomes of things that they've determined they want to do to move forward and grieve. So, it just looks different. Some athletes are less sad and more angry, right? And that's how they process things. Some are more sad and more empathetic. Some really want to compete because they think that's what's best, right? And what they need to do to be able to kind of start moving forward. Other athletes don't want to compete, but they feel like it's the right way to honor Lazar, and so they're going to, bite down and do it. And then others don't think it's right for them, and that's totally cool too. And so, for some of the athletes, it was plugging them in with major stakeholders. Like Rogue Fitness has just been absolutely phenomenal. Katie over there has taken the time to talk with her athletes one-on-one and answer questions that they may have. If not competing could impact their season, or their chances to get an invite to Rogue or something like that. And she was like, look, I don't want that to be like weighing on you whatsoever. We're going to adapt accordingly, when the time's right. And like that'll be reflected in how we move forward. And so, people like that have just been so amazing for athletes to be able to determine what is the best path for them.
Yeah, because it's true. They're thinking about professionally, because this is their livelihood as well. Like, how would it affect, which is normal. They have to think about that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where it's, if they ask for feedback, I'll give them my thoughts on it. And it's one of those things where personally, I think once we heard that the family and those closest and the coach and people like that thought that, it would honor Lazar the best to continue competing because he is such a savage competitor himself, and they believe truly that he would want the competition to move forward. I felt like, okay, that was almost permission to feel like it could go on. And it's tough because then it's like you come back around, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can totally see why we should cancel this whole thing.
Yeah.
So you grapple with it, but that being said, once I determined that the competition was going forward, it was one of those things where I'm like, look, guys, like, the reality of it is that, there was a tragic event, and the court of public opinion can be very, very divisive.
Extreme,
right? Yeah. While I have my own personal set of views on this and, how shitty this is, right? I think we have to let the investigation play out, and then, the people that should be held accountable will be held accountable, right? And so I think that's the first thing that's got to happen, which is tough because then you're asking athletes to compartmentalize and then go back to competing, right?
Exactly.
And some are better and some are not. And for some of them it's tough because they're going to show up a shell of themselves this weekend when they were their fittest version of themselves ever. And so that's really brutal and sad for them. But then again, it's like, on the flip side of that, you're like, well, a guy who also showed up like that lost his life. And, it gives me goosebumps because it's like sickening. But like, there's just a lot. It's all over the place, as you can tell.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine, I know that when something very hurtful happens,
yep,
and it doesn't even have to be at the level of a death. It's very hard for me to go into the gym and get my training done.
Yep.
So I can't even imagine
having
the death of a colleague or friend
yep.
basically happen in front of you.
Yep.
And then having to compete at the highest level with the hardest of events
yep.
handed to you. And I am so in awe of them being able to do it just on a human level.
Yep.
And I kind of feel, and let me know if I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like having people be in the stands and clap kind of, I would hope, gives them some kind of validation or some kind of encouragement. Hey, we're here.
Yeah. And I think that that's great. And I think that fan support is massive. I think, CrossFit itself is built on a community. So I don't think it was the time to go to our separate ways and be alone. I think the community piece is what will help people grieve and process. That being said, I think like on the flip side of that, on like the corporate side of that, like the business side of CrossFit, they're going to be held accountable, and there's going to be a lot of things that need to happen to make sure that moving forward, right, if we're going to return to a sport, that the athlete's safety is paramount, because, in this instance, it didn't feel like it was, right? And so, yeah, I think the other thing is when athletes go out there on the floor and they're having a tough time, I think there's a lot of guilt, right? Why not me? Like, why am I here? But also I think for some of them, and this is where the court of public opinion comes back into place, some of these athletes don't feel like it's the right thing, but then, they also have a hard time not trying to push that narrative onto other people. And so then people feel guilty about wanting to compete.
Yeah.
And I don't think athletes need to feel guilty about competing. If they want to compete, that's fine. And that's what they're going to do to process and move forward. And, maybe they're better at compartmentalizing and they will deal with this next week. And others are going to go out there and they're going to, be a great friend of Lazar and knew who he was. And we're like, yeah, this is how we can honor him and show up for him the best we know how to do. Like the Mayhem team is doing, right? Those who trained with him all the time. So yeah, I don't think that there's any right way to handle this as an athlete. I just think there's your way, and you got to just honor yourself.
Yeah, and from a brand perspective, it's interesting you bring this up, because and the court of public opinion, because if you look at comments on Twitter, you see people who I would assume are not part of CrossFit. They just hear CrossFit, and then they see a death, and they immediately say, "Oh, I knew CrossFit was unhealthy, bad for you, dangerous." So it's really interesting to see that narrative play out as well.
Yeah, and that's tough, right? Because those people don't know any better. They don't know that CrossFit itself as a methodology is much different than CrossFit the sport. Marrying the two of them, I think, is a very important thing, because at the end of the day, right, the whole entire goal of CrossFit is to make people live healthier, better lives, right? That's it, like point blank. And so if you are a CrossFit Games athlete with a platform that inspires people to go and better themselves, you are doing your job in that sense, right? If you're the CrossFit Games and it's the first time that people have been exposed to fitness like this and something new and fun and unique, and they walk into an affiliate, we're winning, right? And so you want to do that. But those people on the internet that are trying to create divide and don't know enough, they don't understand that the CrossFit Games is the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, and these guys are pushing themselves to extremes that they couldn't even fathom, and that CrossFit, just normal CrossFit for you and I or whatever, is it looks a lot different, and it's a lot more sustainable, healthy, and intensity is all relative in there, right?
It is. Yeah. It is. And from, again, a brand perspective, you deal with brands all the time because you're a sports agent. Yep. So do you think that this will affect you, perhaps your job, when you go to a brand, let's say, who isn't necessarily in the CrossFit space or might be already, and you're like, hey, I have this CrossFit athlete. Would you like to work something out in terms of a working relationship? Do you think this will affect that?
I mean, that's definitely something that has crossed my mind. That entire thing has crossed my mind, but I try not to think about it too much right now, because I'm trying to just kind of navigate the weekend with the athletes and allow them to breathe and do all that piece. I mean, just right now, like dumping my thoughts on you, I guess. Some of it it's scary, right? Because if they were to, if you were to remove emotion from it, which is very hard to do, but to try to take a look at it from a business perspective, right? It's like, if you cancel the CrossFit Games, right, you might bankrupt CrossFit, right? They might also be having some big reckoning coming, right, because of what happened. And that's, once again, to be determined, investigation, whatever they do, that's going to get all sorted. But if you cancel the games, you might have a sport to come back to, right? In which case the brands aren't there and the athletes' livelihoods goes away, et cetera. And so that's a very, very scary and real thing. So that's why I think, just removing emotion and doing, having the weekend continue is what's best for athlete livelihood. It's also, I know that could be like callous and kind of cold, but I'm just, once again, removing emotion. I think for those brands, though, that are coming into the space and they don't know CrossFit, I hope that, what we lead with is that community and the superhero athletes we have and all the good things that are happening there. And, they're not scared off by a singular event, but also hopefully before that conversation even happens, I'm hoping that, the right proceedings happen after this event where, we can say, there was, maybe it's gross negligence, maybe it's an accident, who knows, right? Once the investigation's done, though, and we know more details, facts, figures, whatever, we're able to say this happened, these were the measures that were taken from that. And then moving forward, we know that things are going to be X, Y, Z, exponentially better. And you can lean on those things. So yeah, I mean, I hope that, it's just the initial shock and awe doesn't deter people from, experiencing CrossFit in the community themselves and the incredible athletes that are out there. Because, I think that would also be doing a disservice to somebody like Lazar, who was a professional CrossFit Games athlete and was able to do this because brands pursued opportunities with him and wanted to align with who he was as a person, ideally first, right? Which was an amazing human being and a very friendly guy, but a fierce competitor, then an athlete second. So I hope that brands aren't short-sighted and, let trolls online deter them from,
I understand that I asked you a very hard question, because I've also asked myself the same question in terms of growth to mindset and clients within the CrossFit space. And I battled with it myself, because then I'm like, but I'm still in the trenches. Yeah. We're still feeling these emotions. We're still all navigating this. It's very hard to step away and think about the future from a business standpoint. Yeah. But I personally I need to start thinking about this because of my roster of clients, right? And their future. But I agree that it's very, very hard right now to think about the roadmap going forward, especially that it feels like there's zero resolution. Yeah. And we're very much just still dealing with it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's like no amount of memorial or, excitement in this Coliseum right now can bring back, Lazar. And that's the tough part, right? And so that's why it's like you can only do your best. But at the end of the day, it's like it's just going to take time, and it's going to take time for everything, right? For them to investigate, for us to grieve and process, for the community to, smile a little bit more, right? Like you're going to just have to allow people to have the time to, process and go through all those stages their rate. And as much as you want to think forward and like, what's the next thing, I think it's important to be present right now and deal with that and live with those emotions so that you can, feel them and not just like subdue them. And then, the time will come to figure out what's next and how it is that we can move forward as a community and as an ecosystem and, with our athletes, clients, et cetera.
Agreed. Yeah. And now, after the CrossFit Games, how does your role kind of change? I would think maybe, especially after what happened on Thursday, there's a bit more like, hey, go ahead, you disappear type of thing. And then you're kind of, you let them be and recover physically and mentally. Yeah,
exactly. I think we try to just, tamper things a little bit for at least a month, let them have some time off, some downtime. One of the athletes even asked me today, though, like, hey, should I say something about it? And I said, honestly, probably not, because I think you're just saying something right now currently to make noise. It's noise for noise sake. And you're doing that to maybe satisfy what other people think you should be doing. And in reality, I think what you need to do is probably process this more, get your, hand around your emotions on it, and then, speak about it and maybe talk about it next week when you can actually give it the respect and time that it's due. It's, that it's owed. Right?
Yeah.
So, for some, they know how they feel and they want to say it right now. And I think that's amazing, right? Like, I mean, Chandler Smith had an amazing post that I thought was very well said. Brent Fikowski had something phenomenal. And so, those guys are on different ends of the spectrum with competing versus not, but their emotions are all valid, and the way that they, spoke about them was very powerful, right? Whereas people like, DB, she can take a little bit more time to process, her own trauma that she had growing up and how that's kind of calloused her. She feels these things differently, right? It's less sadness, more anger. And it takes time for her to come around and she started to kind of talk about that process, right? Where I think with, somebody like Lex, like she has siblings, she has brothers, so for this, it's just like earth shattering,
Down.
And you can see it on the floor when she comes on and she's taking this event one event at a time, trying to do what would be best to honor him. Right. But the wind is out of her sails a bit, right? And I think the wind is starting to pick up again, right? She's starting to find her rhythm. But for her, the empathy level is through the roof because she has, two brothers, and it's unfathomable losing them, right? And so it's just, once again, people are completely different. They process it in different ways, different emotions. And it's just something where you got to let them take their time for this and deal with it in the way that they're going to deal with it. And then, you turn around and you've got other events coming up and things like that. So hopefully they feel like they get the time they need to be able to do what they need to return to be their best self.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your candor and just giving your athlete's perspective, your perspective, and even touching on some quite sensitive points. I really appreciate you just being very open to these questions and just answering them to the best of your ability. And I really appreciate that. It's hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is hard. So I hope that, first and foremost, I hope that the family can find some type of solid, happiness, something somewhere, because I don't know how you do right now. But I hope that they find comfort and something down the line. I don't really know what. I just hope that they feel better at some point. And just know that the community supports you and the competitors support you guys, and we're really thankful for what they do to put themselves out there. They're the ones in the arena, and when you lose one of your own like this, it's dark. And it's dark. So
it's dark.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.